So that's pretty fucking bleak.
You're still listening. This is our final transmission.
Welcome to Final Transmission. I am, as always, Sam Russo, and with me is...
Jamie Carruthers.
Listen, today we're talking about the movie Wolfen, which I was introduced to, shock and awe, by you, Jamie. This is a movie I'd not seen. We should just get that on t-shirts at this point. 1981's X-rated Wolfen, clocking in at 1 hour 55. It's slightly longer on the spectrum of movies that we've worked on together. But an absolutely stellar cast.
Yeah,
the first thing that caught my eye about this, the top line cast is just untouchable. Is there anyone that stood out to you in this movie? Well, first of all, how and when did you first see it, and what stood out to you about the cast?
So I came to this movie sort of relatively late. I think I was in my early to mid 20s when I first saw it. So it wasn't one that has been like hanging around for me forever. But I was always a huge fan of The Howling. Also 1981, obviously a huge fan of American Werewolf in London, also 1981. So
1981.
Like, hey, so here's another, I assumed, werewolf movie at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I strapped in for it and got something pretty different to what I was expecting.
Glad to hear it. I did too.
But I fucking love it.
Yeah. I picked up on your excitement about it basically from the beginning as soon as you put it forward as one to watch. But leading up to watching it, you know, your message is, have you watched it yet? Have you watched it yet? I was taking that as a very good sign. And I was not in any area disappointed. I kind of broke the golden rule here and actually semi-accidentally read the synopsis, like a 3-line synopsis of this movie before I watched it. And the synopsis just says, a New York cop investigates a series of brutal deaths that resemble animal attacks. So immediately you're thinking werewolf. The title's Wolfen. There's on the cover of the version that I watched, this dusty old VHS, there's a full moon in the eye of a wolf. So we're led to draw certain conclusions early on.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw it was an Albert Finney movie, I was excited, but I haven't always been a huge fan of everything Finney's done. And to be honest, some of his accent work kind of threw me a little bit. So I was hoping for some decent, you know, I guess, what would you call this, mid-career Finney?
Yeah.
Born in 36, this is 81, died in 2019.
Yeah, it's mid-ish, I would say. Not in quality, obviously, but...
No, for sure. I mean, he is a little long in the tooth at this point.
Yeah.
If you'll excuse me. But we're also treated to Gregory Hines, who I absolutely love.
It's an early role for Gregory Hines. Or an early film role, yeah. So he was like basically an unknown. He was on Broadway like right before this. And so, yeah, this is, I don't know if it's his first film role, but it's certainly early doors.
So he's working Broadway, late 70s, jumps on the chance to be in this movie, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Has a pretty incredible TV career, everything from highbrow to trash and everything in between. Somewhat of a cult figure, would you say?
Yeah, I love Gregory Hines as well.
Me too.
There's something about his face that I just find so soothing.
Yeah. I have great, such enormous potential for comic foil, but never quite, well, sometimes, but not in this movie, doesn't quite lean into it all the way, still maintains quite a bit of serious acting chops, I think, and does a great job with everything he touches.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the beautiful things about this film is that it skirts comedy.
Oh god, yeah.
So much. And we'll get into it probably, but it wants to be a noir film to the point where it's almost a spoof of noir films.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, yeah, the interplay between Finney as Dewey Wilson, sorry. Yeah, the interplay between both their characters is regularly hilarious.
Yeah.
Finney's accent is a bit ropey here.
Sure.
But
I give it a pass. What's your take on it?
I think his accent's fine. He's basically doing a Bogart impression for the whole movie.
Yeah.
He's playing this guy as if he's Bogart, but with Albert Finney's squashed little head.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's so charming.
I completely agree, and I think it doesn't. For me, the accent doesn't ring as I don't know where to pitch this. All I can do is English, but I'm just going to try and do a little bit of American. It feels like that sort of hard-boiled East Coast, retaining that sort of I don't know what it's called. I guess it's like a regional formality to the accent, but so dropping into some A's and R's, but also still having some hard edge American vowels. And I think it just works. Like there's a few little slip ups, but for the most part, for a role of this type in this era, famously English actors doing American stuff at this time were just pretty much dog shit, and unforgivably so. And this was pretty great, I thought. A huge treat to see Tom Noonan briefly in this movie.
Love Tom Noonan.
I watch anything with Tom Noonan in it.
Yeah.
We also got a little bit of Mr. Strickland, James Tolkien, famously also from another one of my favourite movies of all time, Masters of the Universe, another, downplayed Tolkien role that maybe doesn't get the cred it deserves. But I thought for his one scene in this as Baldy, he's on screen for about 25 seconds, he's fantastic.
Yeah. Then obviously Edward James Olmos.
Edward James Olmos, borderline movie stealing in this film. Just superb.
He's incredible, and I feel like there was a lot of talk in the 90s and the early 2000s maybe around women about that scene in Lethal Weapon where you see Mel Gibson's arse.
Yeah,
and I think that Edward James Olmos' arse shits all over Mel Gibson's arse. If you'll pardon the expression.
I hope you mean literally. Is this some hidden sex tape that I don't know about?
Yeah, it's gooey, but
good ass shot.
Yeah, loads of great almost nudity. Not almost, but almost.
A guy with a face with that much character, you wouldn't expect such a smooth ass. The faces of this movie are just full of stories. I mean, Albert Finney looks phenomenal. He's got this huge hair. He's craggy, but he's also puffy. Like, he just looks, I don't know, man. He looks like he's some kind of like swollen potato dude for most of this movie. And it's good because it comes across like he's tired, like he's not really sleeping. He's eating junk food. He's really leaning into the, slightly self-abusive cop all hours role, big time. Edward James almost looks amazing. Gregory Hines' face is just constantly animated, constantly doing something interesting on screen. Diane Venora playing Rebecca Neff, a pretty fantastic, I guess we got to call it a supporting role, but, she did a whole bunch of great stuff as a supporting actress, I think, throughout her career.
Yeah.
I'm talking like she's dead. Is she dead? I don't know. She's not dead. She's not dead. Diane Venora and Edward James almost still with us, still kicking.
Was that an Office quote that you just did then?
Yes, it was. Sorry about that. Couldn't help myself. Sorry. Both still kicking its ass. Both still kicking Edward James almost his ass as he shits on Mel Gibson's ass. Whoa, holy shit. I guess that's why they call it Phantom Power.
Sam.
Yep.
Have you ever jumped in Lake Michigan and swam out as far as you can?
No, I haven't, but I know someone who has.
Who's that?
Deanna from the band Sincere Engineer.
Oh, nice. That's who I was thinking of also. Fueled
by corn dogs and rage, just out there. She's one of the most intelligent humans I've ever met.
Really?
Yeah, she's the best, man. I mean, the whole band is, chock full of great humans. We played War on Christmas together last year. Fast friends. Good people. Love that shit.
Well, that record, Rombithian, is so good. Constant play around the Carruthers household.
Sincere Engineer.
Red Scare Industries.
What a combo. No longer together. We mourn the loss.
Yeah. It's all hopeless now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's game over. It's all downhill from here. The 20-year mark, it's all downhill.
Yeah.
Hi, Deanna. You'll never listen to this, but we love you.
Sincere Engineer, man. Great record.
Huge fan. Should we start with a little blow through this movie?
Well, you go. You tell me what you want us to talk about.
I'll tell you how I think this movie plays out. You might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. But so the way I watched this movie to begin with was that I knew I was getting something noir, but I also knew I was obviously watching a horror movie and potentially, most probably, a werewolf movie. At the time, I was certain I was watching a werewolf movie. So,
well, the movie wants you to think it's a werewolf movie until it punches you in the gut and says,
"Yeah,
fucking werewolves! What are you talking about, dickhead?
What, are you a kid? Yeah,
this is real shit.
This is highbrow shit." I mean, it starts with a very confusing but fantastic scene. To begin with, you see a lot of mist and a lot of cloud, and I think werewolves, obviously. I associate the two in my mind really closely. But then we're in New York, and I'm getting, Predator 2 vibes, even though this is several years before Predator 2.
Yeah.
We're greeted by a very strange scene of a man atop a bridge in a bandana swinging some kind of noise-making rope around. And immediately that kind of, for me, set the tone that the sound in this movie was going to be weird as hell from the very beginning. Lots of crazy stereo effects, lots of really janky kind of grinding, smashing sounds. The score is really percussive. So immediately you're getting New York skyline, crazy dude on a bridge, beyond bizarre soundscapes, lots of juxtaposition of natural world and city, and then we see buildings collapsing. So I think that opening is pretty ambiguous, but really arresting. Did you have any thoughts on the opening?
When I watched it this time, I went back and watched that opening scene a couple of times because I think I remembered that it was Albert Finney on top of the bridge, feeding the bird with his mouth. But obviously that isn't what happens. So don't know why I mentioned it.
No, it's somebody else. But do you know who it is?
No, one of the Native American guys, I guess.
Yeah. On first viewing, I didn't realise these dudes were supposed to be cast as Native Americans. And before that becomes a plot point later on.
Yeah.
I just thought it was like a John Travolta lookalike kind of guy with long hair. But that obviously made a lot more sense later on.
Yeah.
But I guess if I were to summarise the plot, I would say that two very important people in high New York society are murdered brutally in a park early on in the movie.
Is it?
And
is Van der Veer? Is he Trump?
Yeah. Is he Trump? He's too in the 10 seconds he's on screen. He's too likable to be Trump. Well, I think they would have. Well, I suppose at the time Trump wasn't seen as quite so much of a toxic, parasitic dickhole as he is now.
Yeah, he's just a real estate guy who's got a lot of money and is in New York high society. I guess there's hundreds of those in New York.
Yeah, but this guy seems really significant because later on in the movie, the cops are talking about politicians being in their pocket or dead presidents and, sort of high capitalism pulling the strings of government type vibes, which makes me think they're upper tier, upper echelon movers and shakers. So yeah, possibly Trump vibes. I
thought that was weird because obviously the climax happens in Van der Veer Tower.
Mm.
And I just thought it was there was a weird little, there's a sort of an offhand little line where he was he was a rich guy and maybe one day would be president. And
interesting.
I just thought that was pretty fun.
Well, it'd be really surprising to me if Michael Wadley liked Trump. Director Michael Wadley, quite famous environmentalist. I wouldn't go as far as saying necessarily an anti-capitalist filmmaker, but definitely not a person who holds a lot of high regard for the excesses of excessive wealth.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Weird that he only made one film. We'll talk about him a bit more later.
Yeah, we'll hit him later on for sure. Either way, these two very important, very rich, this couple are brutally murdered in a park. We'll go back to what goes down a little bit later because some of the visuals are phenomenal. And then we get essentially a hard-boiled New York cop movie for about an hour. We get a lot of investigation. We get following leads. We get some great, downtown police station back and forth. We learn more about the various cops on the case, including Dewey Wilson, Whittington. We get an encounter with Tom Noonan's Ferguson. We see a whole bunch of crazy characters as the murder is investigated. There are subsequent murders. Somebody I think who was billed as a vagrant is murdered in the Bronx in a very similar fashion. And things start to point towards a slightly unorthodox outcome, potentially some kind of animal attack. Originally, they're thinking there's no residue from a weapon. The wounds don't correspond with a physical attack by a human. It's an uncommon way to die in a park in New York. Nobody was shot, nobody was stabbed, they don't know what's going on. So Diane Venora Rebecca Neff teams up with Dewey Wilson, and they begin investigating political motives behind the killing.
Yeah, I guess this is when those political groups, domestic terrorism groups, were really big.
Yeah,
sort of coming off the back of the 70s. You've got all those groups like the Weather Underground and whatnot, who were sort of categorized by this film as basically kids playing around. Definitely,
there's a lot of allusions to you'll be radicals until your trust fund runs out, that kind of thing. because we're spending a lot of time in a hard-boiled cop world. I love that. I think that works really well. That is a brilliantly dismissive viewpoint for what could potentially be really dangerous radical terrorist groups. So there's some good grind between the FBI and the NYPD, which I love. And eventually, the whole plot rampages forward to the point where we're led to believe that a werewolf is committing these atrocious murders. But it turns out not to be true. There is a twist, which I imagine we'll talk about a little bit later on. But why don't we go back to the instigating moment of the movie, the first murders. What did you think of this sequence?
I think it's great. So this is obviously the first time that we're introduced to the Wolfen eye view. Mm-hmm. So the first time you sort of see as they see, which is sort of a mishmash of different digital effects on top of standard photography. Mm-hmm. And it all sort of looks a bit otherworldly and a bit sort of like you're supposed to be seeing that they see more information somehow. Obviously, there's no more information in the image because that's all there is.
That's all we can see.
Yeah. But there's something there, and obviously you don't see the Wolfen or the creatures or whatever until way later in the film. So you only see through their eyes, and maybe you hear a couple of growls and see someone jumping somewhere.
A swipe.
Yeah. But that's about it. So I love this. I think there's a bit of a through line about how you don't die instantly when parts of your body are severed. Sure. And the first time you see that is here with the gun in the security guard's hand.
Yeah.
After it gets swiped off. A lot of the stuff that's here that happens in this scene sets up loads of really good comedy in basically the next scene, which I really enjoy. Like obviously the wolf kills everybody who's involved in this scene. Or the Wolfen, whatever it is. And it's gory and it's fun. The opening of this film, you're not expecting to have fun.
Yeah.
You're expecting a sort of a grisly 70s, pretty serious. You could, if you were completely devoid of a sense of humour, you could probably enjoy this film on that level anyway.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, this opening scene makes you think that you're going to be watching something that's pretty dour. Or pretty brutal and pretty dour. You
get a really grungy portrayal of New York, don't you? You get a really no frills. It chooses quite deliberately to focus on not just like the dilapidated and the kind of socially crumbling parts of New York, but also just the stuff that is completely broken. Like the landscape is completely trashed for the most part.
Yeah.
It doesn't overdo it like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles style, but it also doesn't give you that sort of romanticized version like Warriors. It's like, it looks very real in my opinion. It does look like they just went to the completely destroyed parts of the Bronx and started rolling. Yeah, I completely agree. And then obviously following this scene we're introduced to Dewey Wilson, who is jogging and looking like the guy out of The Bear. Yeah.
And then we find out that he's retired and he's called back in to try and solve these murders, these grisly high-profile murders. Mm-hmm. And from the second he talks to someone else, they are just absolute back and forth, zippy dialogue. I fucking love it.
It's great. And it is like a rusty zip in it because it's low-key, it's slow and steady, but it's so sharp.
Yeah.
It feels really natural because of that reason. Nobody's hamming it up for the camera. Nobody's, stepping on anyone else's lines. It's really paced. It's really calm. What was really surprising to me about this whole movie is just how slow moving the cop stuff is. It's not like I'll only go back to it because you said Lethal Weapon earlier in reference to Mel Gibson's ass, but it's not Lethal Weapon. It's not a quick, fast buddy cop movie. It's so incredibly slow, Chinatown slow.
Yeah.
It's obviously picking up from the classics in that respect. And Finney was born for that. He's such a good slow actor. He's so ponderous, and he's like a cruise ship when he turns around a corner. Like it takes him forever just to walk around a corner. It's great to watch. He really holds your attention, I think.
Yeah, he's just got the face that's made for these sorts of roles. The two roles that I really really love Finney in are this and Scrooge, and it's just like
no way.
Yeah, him as Ebenezer Scrooge is just perfect, and
that's pretty cool.
Albert Finney can do Bogart, but Bogart couldn't do Ebenezer Scrooge.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, I'll take that. And I think part of the charm is he's got a face that you can see thinking. You know, when he's thinking in this, he's doing it with his face. And that's no mean feat for an actor to show, you know, to show the audience that you're thinking is super hard, right? I mean, you get so many, you can ham it up, you can do hand gestures, you can do all kinds of stuff, but he just has to, you know, move like 0.4% of his facial muscles and you know what's going on with the rest of his head. It's great. Really clever approach to the role.
One of my favourite tropes in all films is people eating when they shouldn't be to show how jaded they are. And they just keep it coming in this.
Yeah. Every gore scene, every autopsy table, everywhere you go, the guy is munching.
Yeah, so obviously he's eating his little donuts at the crime scene when somebody drops Mrs. Van der Veer's head.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's probably our first real stone cold piece of comedy, right?
Yeah.
I think it's Whittington turns around and says, "Careful with her," and then you hear a thump, and that's them dropping the head as they put her on the gurney. It's so good.
But yeah, so obviously he's eating that. He's eating cookies all the way through the autopsy scene.
Yeah.
And then they're at the donut cart, the hot dog cart, while she's explaining all of the horrible things that some of these terrorist groups do.
Well, he takes a huge bite of a hot dog as she says, "Cock and balls," which is superb. Remove the genitalia, the cock and balls. So yeah, I mean, it's not a subtle device, but it works. We love him for it.
It's particularly gruesome in this because the scene, like normally it's like the corridor and he's eating a sandwich and you're meant to...
Sure.
I think it's meant to show how blasé they are, but also it's meant to make you feel pretty blasé about it as well. Whereas in this, it wants the opposite. It's like he takes a bite of the cookie and then you get a close-up of the victim's teeth pulled out. Yeah. It's like, it wants you to know that you shouldn't be this comfortable with death.
Yeah, nobody should, yeah. But it sets us up for a lot of things in his character, and I think it does do the job of showing us, you know, this is a guy who's kind of been everywhere and seen everything, but he's also kind of weird. Yeah. You know, we're told early on that he's a weird guy, and you know, I'm not being funny, but in this era of filmmaking, it's kind of hard for me to tell as a modern audience who's weird and who's not, because everyone looks kind of weird. Yeah. And everyone's behaving super weird. So that's our first tell that he's not just super jaded, but also kind of different to everyone else around him.
Yeah, that's sort of Sherlock Holmes, brilliant, but because he's brilliant, he's so weird. I wrote a note that was basically that this is Philip Marlowe's Hounds of the Baskervilles.
Why not? Why? I mean, that's pretty great.
Yeah. But I think everybody, like you say, everybody looks weird in this because everyone's an actor. No one's a film star. Everyone is an actor. Everyone has a real presence, except for maybe Rebecca Neff. I think that character doesn't have an awful lot to do apart from spout tech exposition and then get boned by Dewey later on.
She's different texturally to Dewey, and they stand quite well next to each other in a lot of scenes, in that you get to see somebody who's maybe not supposed to be normal in the Rebecca Neff character, but somebody who's maybe responding to these things in a slightly more like reasonable way. And that kind of, again, highlights his oddball side. There's moments where he's leaning a bit close to Columbo, and I feel like she kind of pulls him back a little bit. Yeah. You know, nothing. I love Columbo. I'm not saying Columbo's bad. I'm just saying it doesn't really work in this context. So what we get from Albert Finney early on is a pretty arresting entrance, some great, really natural character traits that stand him apart from the crowd, and we learn that he's clearly a really deep thinker. He's obviously had a bit of a history with booze, kind of been through it all, seen it all, which is great. But we get a massive sense of his depth, I think, early on.
Definitely.
And that plays out later, because no other kind of, I don't think not many other kind of people portraying this character could have pulled off what he pulls off later on in the movie without those sort of uncharted depths being hinted at early on. Because again, we're not dealing with werewolves. As the movie progresses, we find out through the vehicle of Dewey and his investigative prowess, but also his open mind and his unorthodox ways, that what's happening here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're dealing with some kind of pseudo-cryptid Wolfen creature that is essentially protecting its habitat.
Yeah, that's ultimately it. And it's
okay.
Like it's weird because there's a load of plot holes that you can already just yoink out of that. Why is New York its habitat?
Yeah, don't even get me started.
Why does the film start when it does and not literally hundreds of years earlier when they were building New York for the first time?
But more importantly, who cares?
We don't find that out until way, way later. And then in between that, there's a scene where... So Dewey arrests Edward James almost as his character, but maybe third, halfway through, because he used to be a radical of some repute.
In a Native American group of radicals who are protesting lots of government action, but also lots of local stuff happening in New York, especially with, development areas, huge development areas and gentrification. Yeah.
And so Dewey kind of doesn't let go that it might be Edward James Olmos, and then follows him one night after he gives him a bit of a spiel about how he can turn into animals. And you think, okay, maybe he's not a werewolf, maybe he's a shapeshifter. Maybe the film isn't about werewolves, maybe it's about shapeshifters. And then we watch him get naked, take some drugs, and pretend to be a wolf for a bit. It's fucking,
which I loved.
Fucking great.
It is great. Oh, for a minute I was worried you didn't like that scene, the way you said it, but I thought it was awesome.
I flip-flop between the... what's going through Edward James Olmos' character's head there. Does he get high and believe that he's shapeshifting into a wolf? Or does he know that Dewey's there and he's just trying to fuck with him? When I watch it, I can go either way, depending on what mood I'm in.
I think it's ambiguous, and I think there's definitely a lot of weight to both those assumptions, because at first I thought, oh shit, shapeshifter movie. There's this group of Native American bridge builders in New York who are turning into wolves and killing all the land developers and random hobos. So I got really excited about that. I thought that'd be an amazing direction for the movie to go in. I actually think I prefer where it ends up going, because that's almost too silly for what we're set up for. But my read on it was that he was legitimately just super attuned with the idea of shapeshifting, and he was doing what he said he was doing. He was, if you think it, you can be it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And exploring that fully with some kind of, psychotropic hallucinogenic substances. But also, he may be just completely taking the piss out of Dewey's character and playing up to some absurd Native American stereotype. We don't know, because we don't know how aware the filmmakers are of how they're portraying Native Americans in this movie. So it's tricky. But I like both reads, and I think both work because the performance, is really visceral and really full on. So it's almost hard to get a read on. So I think it's clever either way. That's what we say about things we don't understand, right? It's very clever.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of great scenes when we're introduced to the is it Native American shapeshifters plot line potential. There's some great scenes when Dewey has to go to the very top of that enormous bridge to talk to the guys at the top there. Later on in the movie, he goes to what is kind of like a dive bar, I guess, like a backroom bar / meeting place for this group of Native Americans in the heart of New York, and that's a pretty amazing and stark juxtaposition to all the rubble and steel and just broken beams and stuff that we've seen leading up to that point. So that kind of hinted at storyline / outcome gives us loads of really great visuals and some awesome performances. But before we get there, we're 100% pursuing this film noir experience of pretty brilliantly timed comedy woven in with incredibly bleak, tired cop drama.
Yeah.
At first I thought, if it's going to be this slow, they can't sustain this for what it's going to be an hour and 10 of the movie is going to be this. Surely they can't keep me interested. But just on strength of performance, the plot isn't, it's not hurtling ahead like a bus, is it? It's just kind of chugging from ambiguous clue to ambiguous clue, but somehow I stayed in it. I stayed with it, and I thought it was a really well sustained level of tension throughout that hour. How did you feel in the whole cop segment?
Well, yeah, no, I think that works especially well because it's pitched at a very specific level. So one of the things that I love about this film is that it always seems to pull the characters between two worlds. In the cop stuff, it's sort of oldie-timey cop intellect versus high-tech new era policing with all this sort of machinery. You've got Neff, who is a modern cop, who's all about psychology and building a profile and all that kind of stuff, versus Dewey's sheer intuition and just something doesn't feel right here, so let's keep digging in this weird way. So I think that's what really drives it. And it's all performance, really. It's all on the strength of the performances that are happening. I mean, there's a few things in the cop stuff that pull me out of it. Like, I don't understand why they have sex. It
just sort of happens, right?
There's no chemistry there. I mean, I think the film wants us to think that there's chemistry there, but there isn't.
There isn't really, apart from in the very first office scene where he offers to drive her home, and she says, like, not tonight or next time or something. I thought, yeah, that could go somewhere. But then you're right, it's kind of dead from then on out.
Yeah.
It's kind of just professional friction, but it doesn't move into that, like, hot professional friction. It just stays like, he's too old for you.
Yeah.
That's where it lands for me. Like,
yeah, definitely that. And, like, they have some witty repartee back and forth.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, I guess we're supposed to think that's flirting, but I didn't read it as that.
I wasn't getting those I thought he was more likely to fuck Whittington than he was to fuck Neff. Like, to be honest.
My favourite bit of their back and forth is when she says, "Why did you become a cop?" And he said, "I like to kill."
Yeah, that's great. So much of that, just stone cold, dry as a bone delivery, like, just killing it. I mean, that whole exchange is great in The Office, I think. It tells us so much about their characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why they bang. And to be honest, I didn't know who was banging when I first saw that happen. I was like, who the fuck is having sex right now? What's happening here? So maybe I wasn't as in it as I thought I was at that moment. But one thing that really smoked it for me throughout that whole sequence, I love Dewey Wilson as a cop because he doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
He just shows up in places and picks up on, like, the tiniest little details and vibes, and then just starts pulling things together. He doesn't have a notebook. He's not questioning people, really. He's just kind of talking near them, and they just kind of get sucked in. He's not really paying attention to the tech stuff. He's not really paying attention to all the surveillance and the interviews. He's just kind of showing up places and seeing what happens. And I found that really endearing in a character. He doesn't have a huge amount of drive, which I thought was really cool for a cop character. Because normally you've got this, like, I got 2 days left to retirement, or you got, like, some stupid cliche, or like he's a workaholic or whatever. He just kind of acts like he kind of has to be there, so he might as well solve the case, which I love. It's more like an LA noir cop in a New York setting. So I just, again, like, he just dragged me through that whole hour, just hanging on his every word. I thought it was great. And obviously they visit these great characters. They visit Tom Noonan, who is a wolf expert, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that safe to say? And who loves wolves, is really passionate about wolves. Obviously they visit Baldy, played by James Tolkien. We get a great rolling cast of really rich kind of bit characters doing their scene really well and then moving on. And then we start to enter the horror aspects of the movie, which is where we get more and more attacks. And we get more POV. I like to think of it as, like, the POV shots from the Wolfen perspective are like somewhere between Geordie LaForge and Predator, which is great because we don't see either of that for, like, the best part of a decade after this movie, right? So we're treated to some pretty great visuals. I mean, by today's standards, not necessarily. I can't see a young audience today being wowed by it, but I thought it worked perfectly.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, really, and see if you think if it worked, or if there was too much of it, or if there was anything about that you would change. I
would go as far as to say maybe overused, just because the thrill of it is more about the placement and the movement and the fantastic, like, steady cam work. So I think, I know we go back to Evil Dead a lot, but because those like fast moving tracking shots in the woods are used fairly infrequently, and they're used to be precursor to something hugely dramatic, the tension is enormous. Like, that's perfect execution. In this, it's a bit less so. It's a bit more, it's used to be a bit creepier, but the intensity of the visuals is so high that you're kind of led to believe something massive is about to happen, and it doesn't always pay off. So for me, maybe slightly overused, but that's because I was kind of over the effect after the first few uses, I think. The part that makes me think it might be a bit overused is when it happens on camera angles that don't feel part of the Wolfen's eye view. They don't feel Wolfen. Yeah, so, like, the stuff where it's super low to the ground, but then you get stuff where it's like people just turning around, and it's like you're not here, you're not 5 feet away from their face, so right in the eye line, or like up in impossible places like trees and stuff. It just felt a little bit I totally get why they did it. I'm not criticizing the decision to do that. It just, for me, the effect wore off a little bit. I didn't dislike it. I just feel like it would have been more effective to someone like me if it was a bit more sparingly used. Because you're so in the noir at that point as well. And you're so in the cop story. And then it's like, oh, fuck, it's Predator. Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah, and I think you're right that you are expecting like big things to happen. And then like it happens at the beginning with the driver or the security guard. And it's like, oh, God, something's going to happen. And then he gets chomped and his hand comes off. And then it's like, oh, it's going to happen again to the rich guy. And then he gets chomped and he's dead. Like, everyone just gets chomped. Nothing else happens. Yeah. I tried to write a list of the deaths and it just says chomped next to everybody's name.
Chomped.
Rich coked up lady, chomped, but this time with pearls. Workman, hoid off the Brooklyn Bridge. We liked that. Tom Noonan,
I love that.
Chomped on his moped. Gregory Hines, chomped while eating crisps.
You got them all. That's the list. So it is the Brooklyn Bridge that they're on in most of these shots.
So the high wire, the bit where he's up there with what's his name, Edward James,
Eddie Holt,
Edward James Olmos' character. That's the Manhattan Bridge.
Okay,
and then later it's the Brooklyn Bridge.
Okay, nice. Yeah, my bridge recognition is shaky. I'm glad you did your research there. But that, again, like these quintessential New York landmarks, obviously we get the skyline, we get what at the time was, the complete, like the bombed out Bronx, all playing into this growing theme, this sort of steady. I love that we're not force-fed an environmentalist propaganda speech at any point in this movie. It's all just done visually, and it's done like an auteur does their thing. We're just shown great juxtaposition between the natural world and the slow decay of modern life, like cities. We get lots of sort of mirror shots of like how the human world is dog eat dog and total survivalist, but how characters like Dewey have kind of lost touch with their primal senses or their appreciation of nature and things like that, which we later see as a huge about face and a big character arc on his part in particular.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean about the film sort of forcing characters to exist between two worlds. Like there's like high class New York versus like the down and dirty, like the Bronx. There's the high tech policing versus like the dog and detective work. You've got like the race thing is always sort of there whenever Dewey and any of the Native American characters, but mostly Eddie Holt. You've got like the spirit realm versus the corporeal reality, and Dewey's always stuck there right in the middle. Yeah. He sort of almost exists outside of everything because he's so weird.
Yeah, that's his weirdness, right? He's like a spirit walker between worlds. He kind of traverses all these. That's a great like rundown of all the sort of the dichotomies of the relationships in the movie, for sure. That there's a lot of like constant tension bouncing around, and I think that feeds the momentum of the movie. It's a slow grinding tension, isn't it? It's not a dramatic clash of ideologies. It's like, it's a way to kind of stoke the fire right up to a final climax and a big message at the end, I think. But a masterful midsection of this movie. I think I love the start. The start feels fresh. It feels crisp. It feels totally stylized. There's not a lot of movies. There's a lot of movies that look like this, but there's not a lot of movies that use this look in the way that this movie does and ties it together with such a bizarre soundscape from start to finish.
Well, there's one of those horrible things in like film criticism where it's like New York was almost a character in its own right. There's a reason why people say stuff like that, because it's like this film wouldn't work in Chicago or LA or I don't know. Maybe it would work in Detroit. I've seen RoboCop. It kind of looks sort of similar. It would be different, but it could work. Yeah, like,
you could get. It has a similar. Well, it has a grimier. I mean, in this era. I mean, I'm not like typecasting Detroit, but like, if you want that, all these central clashes that you've just mentioned of rich and not rich and super palatial and completely like dilapidated New York. Yes, definitely. Yeah. You're right. Detroit doesn't have the same like. It doesn't have the same end-to-end quality to it in terms of how people perceive it in the movie world at this time.
And I think that's another thing as well, is that obviously we'd see a lot of New York in films around this time and prior to this film. And like, you never see it look quite this shitty.
Yeah, agreed.
Like, you would normally see, I don't know, like 42nd Street and like the places that were pretty sketchy around this time before Ed Koch and Giuliani sorted all that shit out and ruined it.
But it feels dangerous in this movie. It feels way more edgy to see. But I mean, maybe because we're looking at it with slightly meta eyes, but I'm looking at it and thinking, that must have been a fucking sketchy place to shoot. Like, that doesn't look like somewhere you could just pitch up and start filming. I bet there were some stories going on behind the camera.
Yeah.
Especially when they go to that church. I don't know exactly where they shot it. I would be amazed if it wasn't literally the Bronx. But
yeah, no, I think it was.
And you can tell, like, they're shooting super early in the morning just to kind of get in and get out, which adds, not to be too pretentious about it, but this movie feels really brave to me in a lot of ways. This doesn't feel like a movie that was like, we're going to make millions off this. It's pretty artsy in a lot of areas. And I don't mean that in like a disparaging way. I mean it in a really fucking brave way. Yeah. Like, here's your budget, here's your studio, and then you just go and make an art movie about like cops and, strange spirit wolves. Like, I think it's amazing.
Well, I think that segues us quite neatly into talking about Michael Wadley and his career.
Yeah, if you want to call it that.
I guess this film and Woodstock, and then being a climate activist full time.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And that's kind of all we know about the guy. I bet you know a little bit more, but like...
Well, he was in like Scorsese orbit around the time that sort of Scorsese was starting his career. So they worked together on like a couple of Scorsese's early films.
Right.
And then he made the Woodstock documentary, which won an Oscar.
So my understanding is that he made Woodstock and was pretty famously uncompromising about things like the length. It was a really long movie, like 3 hours plus documentary. And, the spirit of Woodstock, and was pretty, critically acclaimed because of the success of that and how everybody seemed to like it, from critics down to the public, despite its, pretty obscene length. And then, he starts working on this movie, basically based on a Whitley Strieber book. Do you say Strieber or Stryber?
Definitely Strieber.
Yeah, I say Strieber. I heard people saying Stryber. So based on a Whitley Strieber book that he, said he didn't even like. He just liked the concept of.
Yeah. As
I understand it, that's his LinkedIn. He did that. He did this, and then he basically bought like a $30,000 house in LA, opened it up to whoever wanted to live there, and started being a full-time climate activist, and also delivering a lot of lectures and a lot of kind of doing the circuit at universities and being kind of a pseudo-intellectual on the subject, which is a pretty interesting post-Wolfen career, given that everybody else did a lot in movies, and he kind of bailed.
He had a big old falling out with Suits, and I guess either Hollywood said, go fuck yourself, or he couldn't be bothered with the hassle because he didn't need to be bothered with the hassle. And went and lived a life that he probably is much happier in.
He's probably way happier being a pretty right-on climate activist and being proven right way ahead of his time pretty much constantly than, making more movies like this for dickweeds like us to pick apart. Like, it seems like a slightly more rewarding existence.
Yeah.
But he does an incredible job in this movie, I think, of just pulling together incredibly diverse artistic influences, a pretty trashy but deep, beautiful, trashy plot, and obviously a love of film noir, cop movies, and also somehow shoveling all that into a package that was accepted by a major studio and was released with a budget. It was promoted well, and it maybe did, technically, I guess, is a Hollywood flop, but it has an enormous cult following.
Yeah.
The more I read about it online, the more I see that whether or not you call it a werewolf movie, in terms of wolf movies, it's top 5 for, thousands of fans of the genre. So he does something incredibly well here. I mean, what do you think are some of the moves that he pulls that really make this movie buzz?
It's hard to sort of really nail down those things because it's so accomplished. For like a guy that made one narrative feature and one really fucking long documentary, like the edit of this is really restrained. The shots are amazing. You said before, it feels brave. The stuff on the bridges is terrifying, scary stuff in the movie, I would say. And
wild shots up on top of that bridge.
Yeah.
The altitude, the sort of lack of stability. It's a crazy angles to pick. I mean, I bet they were limited in terms of space up there and probably time as well. But like, masterful scenes on that bridge. Amazing.
And like you say, the stuff in the church, and like the way that he shoots like smashed up buildings and like rubble, it feels really, I don't know, there's a real sort of tangible element to it.
Yeah.
Like, I've never been to New York, going in October. Probably won't look like that anymore. But like, I feel like I was there. I feel like I understood the place. And I think that's also why you choose New York over, say, Detroit or anywhere else, is because it's a place that you think that you know because you've seen it in so much media.
Sure.
So when you see this new side of it, or the reality of it within the confines of this film, it does something different, makes you think differently about the place. Which they nail that here. He nails it, and like the choice to have the sort of the character eye, the Wolfen eye view, like we said, it gets a bit. All right, come on now, go on with it. But like those initial shots of that are really interesting, and like there are moments when like it's just really sort of clever sound work and visual work. When it really works, it's amazing. And the moments when it doesn't work, that's probably when we're like, okay, we've had enough of this now.
True. It doesn't feel like it's just a visual effect and a kooky sound. It feels like it's a real effort to give you the perception that this creature is experiencing. It's not just like, oh, we'll put a cool effect on it. It's like, we're going to put some care and attention into like where the heat signatures are and what noises they make at what point.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of attention to detail that sells it for me. And I think in terms of all the shots of the actual city and the landscapes, I think if anyone listening has ever gone out and tried to take quote unquote cool pictures of like rundown buildings and stuff, they always just come back looking like garbage.
Yeah.
They don't look artistic. It just looks like you've pointed your camera and taken a picture. So to do this is a huge accomplishment, I think, to make it look the way it looks. And there's bits where the whole skyline just looks like jagged teeth.
Yeah.
You know, that's surely not an accident. He's picking those locations to make us feel like we're in the mouth of a wolf. It's just incredibly poised. Like, it's really poised filmmaking, which I know sounds a bit poncy, but you know, his obsession with glass and mirrors and reflective surfaces, you know, juxtaposed against brick and wood and more natural elements. It's just really well woven together. And I just soak up all the visuals from start to finish. And you don't get that in a lot of, you know, simple cop movies, do you? You get what you get. You get a pretty beige palette with lots of blue every now and then. And you just kind of, you know what you're getting for the rest of the movie after 3 shots. It's not the case in this movie. It keeps you on your toes. Every time the camera turns or points somewhere else, you think, what the fuck's going to be next? Like, keep it coming. I'm in. And that's part of the genius, I think, is that it could be boring. It could be generic. But it falls into none of those traps while still satisfying everything you want from a genre movie.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things as well is the fact that this massive counterculture guy wrote a movie about cops that isn't like cops are the worst thing in the world. They're like cops are just people that exist. Yeah, I disagree. Scum.
I mean,
obviously.
ACAB, obviously.
Yeah,
yeah. But however, give this guy his due. He doesn't let that. He obviously felt and thought it. I guarantee it. But he doesn't let that bleed into his script. His script is great because it portrays real, living, breathing humans, even though they're cops. Like it just does that really well. We get the right kind of cliche in the right moment. We get the right kind of, you know, pretty tight fitting genre confines at the right moments in the movie to keep it ticking along. But we don't get bored at all. Well, I don't get bored at all in this movie.
No, it's amazing. I love it.
I totally understand why you love it, and it speaks more to your fandom beyond, you know, Italian splatter. This is you getting to enjoy a movie that's genuinely good, like from front to back. And it almost made it hard for me to think of stuff to say about it on the podcast, because I was like, I just fucking enjoyed this. Like, you know, as a huge fan of both horror and hard-boiled cop movies, this could have either gone really, really well or absolutely terribly for me. And thankfully, it did the former. Just ticked a lot / every box. I mean, the whole movie is kind of like, it explodes out the idea of gentrification, because it's talking about gentrification of like boroughs and areas in New York, which are obviously like you said, just done inhumanly heavy-handedly and without any kind of thought or regard for what was already going on in those areas to begin with. Obviously, like, we know that this was by design and not like an organic evolution of a cityscape. This is like corrupt people doing horrible things to communities of of people and just displacing them, essentially demonizing, displacing, infecting their communities with, guns and drugs, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect mirror to the Native American, undercurrent story in this movie. It's cyclical. It's showing that this will happen again and continues to happen unless the cycle is broken. And that's what I think is happening in the final scene. So the final scene in the movie, Dewey is confronted by several Wolfen in the fantastic setting of the penthouse of the rich dead dude, whose name I've forgotten.
Vanderveer,
that's it. And it's a great setting for a final showdown. There's a lot of very clever lighting and mirror work and angles and all kinds of stuff going on in this scene that you really have to watch. Like, it's not really worth me explaining it, or you just got to see it. But the ultimate resolution here is that instead of shooting the Wolfen, using violence, he kind of attempts to communicate with them, and lowers his gun, empties of its shells, and then instead of running away or attacking them, he trashes the architectural model of this new development. Somehow the Wolfen perceive this as a gesture, either of intent or of peace, and they end up leaving. And I think that is probably the big statement piece of the movie, isn't it? It's like you break the cycle of violence by disrupting. Essentially, like it's speaking to protest. I think it's saying disrupt these plans, stop these things from happening, but also do so in peace, and you may break the cycle of oppression and genocide that is rampaging through this great American culture.
In that big climax, obviously the thing that really stands out to me is earlier on in the film, he's talking with Eddie Holt about the eyes of the hunter.
He says you have dead man's eyes.
Yeah.
The eyes of the dead.
In that climactic scene, he gets the eyes of the hunter. He opens his mind far enough that he can communicate with the Wolfen. He sees them in the same effect that they see us or him or whoever. I think that's what allows them to communicate on that sort of base next level. And I think I really like that. I really like the idea because he's been set up as weird throughout the whole movie. We know that he sees things differently to other people, and not in a everyone's just telling you that he's weird. Like he's genuinely written in a way that is interesting, and has an interesting point of view. So that ending scene really makes sense to me. I mean, you could argue that it doesn't make sense as the climax to this story.
Right.
Once the credits roll, there's wolves everywhere on Wall Street, which, I mean, is amazing.
Leaping out of buildings.
Turning up in the back of people's cars. Yeah. Biting their heads off.
But I don't need that resolved because of the strength of the scene. I think that's the artistry. I'm not sitting there after that scene thinking, but what about the wolves? I'm so in. Yeah. And using the device of doing a POV shot from Dewey looking at the wolves with the same effect we've been seeing throughout the whole movie is magic. I thought it was going to be a bit cheesy, but it just smokes. It's a great shot. And what it made me think, looking back on the character, which again, we're banging on a lot about Albert Finney's character here, but I think it warrants it. It made me think, right, I know what's happened here. We're told that he drank too much, and he dealt with some family issues and some personal problems by just like dulling the senses and drinking it. I think he had such a strong investigative eye and such an incredible intuition that he kind of couldn't handle it, and he had to booze. And boozing kind of dulled all that down, and he lost touch with who he was internally. And when he comes back into the movie at the start, when he's running, that's when we see him kind of moving back towards his instincts and his ability to kind of perceive beyond what quote unquote normal folks can perceive. And it just gave me the full circle on the character, that final scene. First watch of the final scene, I thought smashing the model was maybe a bit on the nose. Yeah. But then I realized that I didn't actually realize what was happening in that moment. I had to watch it twice to fully get the scene. So I just think it works. It glues the whole thing together. It brings us full circle, and it kind of tees up a sequel. We could easily do a sequel. But yeah, love that resolution. Totally happy with how the movie ends and what we're given as a huge payoff.
The climax is the perfect climax. And like one of the great things that sort of follows you throughout this movie is I feel like the film is sort of closing in on you. Like the wolves are getting closer and closer as you sort of make your way through it. And then by the time you're at this climax, like the big action climax where there's 10 wolves running around Wall Street, just sort of gleaming in, and appearing out of nowhere and biting guys' heads off, which I love. I love that the Chekhov's severed head. Like, obviously, Greg Hines talks about how 1 in 5 dead guys can carry on chatting or whatever. Once they have their head chopped off, and then that happens. Like it's really dumb, but it's great.
It is great.
You get the action climax, and then you get like the emotional climax.
Yeah,
and the wolves are getting closer and closer and closer until it's just Dewey one-on-one, eye to eye with a wolf, and it just goes the right way. Oh, it's just really good, and like you never really know what's going to happen. I would say a lot of horror films of any era are quite predictable.
Mm-hmm.
They're safe. Even like some of the classics have a bit of a safe feeling to them.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
There's a level of comfort there because it wants you to get comfortable, so it can make you uncomfortable. But this film has no interest in making you comfortable.
Nope. And that's how well the antagonist, the Wolfen, that's how well they're rendered. Yeah. Because they really feel like, I mean, not just because they are literal wolves in the movie, but they feel like totally unpredictable wild animals. Their motivation isn't clear.
Yeah.
Their patterns are not systematic. They're not just out to get the good guy, and that because that's boring. They do way more with the idea of wolves as an antagonist, a righteous antagonist in this movie. The shots we get of the actual wolves, obviously this is of the time they're using real animals in movies, and obviously looking back how awful that is. A lot of these animals were treated really poorly, but they are so awesome to look at in this movie. They look fucking fantastic from start to finish.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I read that there was like basically in every scene with a wolf, there was an army of guys with guns. So if a wolf looked at someone the wrong way, that wolf was gone.
If we're going to draw any positives out of that horrible situation and that pretty shameful era of movie making, it's that it just looks stunning. Yeah. I know it's shallow, but they look incredible. They look absolutely incredible. And we're really led to kind of love these wolves by Tom Noonan's character.
Yeah.
When Ferguson is sitting alone watching all the projected footage of wolves being shot from helicopters and hunted, and baby wolves being left to die and stuff, and he's crying. We're given an entrance to empathy there. I think we're sort of led to start empathizing with the wolves a little bit more.
Yeah, but that's taken away, right? Because they kill him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I love that. That again speaks to the unpredictability and I guess what we as humans perceive as sort of the vicious nature of the natural world. So a lot of love for how the wolves are portrayed, no love for how they're handled within the industry.
Yeah.
But yeah, just really used to the max in terms of like their silhouettes, putting them in mist, having them stalk, getting to see the expressions on their faces. That stuff was pretty valuable, especially leading up to that final scene. We've talked so much about how great this movie is and how awesome it looks and how well directed it is and the pacing and the characters and everything. We barely mentioned the gore, which is normally your big bag, Jamie. What do you think of the gore in this movie?
I mean, the gore is there. Like, the gore isn't why I love this film. Yeah. There are films that I love because of the gore.
Sure.
But they don't have anything that this film has. This film is what people that don't like horror films would refer to as a real movie.
Yeah, dude, it is.
If it wasn't for the gore, like you'd barely know that this is even like tangentially related to the horror genre.
Yeah, it'd be a thriller. It would be like there's a lot of thrillers that skirt horror. Silence of the Lambs is regarded by many as being like one of the greatest movies of all time. Nobody would call it a horror movie necessarily. It's not a million miles off that in terms of its its use of all the similar devices. The severed hand flying across the screen was a great setup for the gore in this movie for me because it was really dark and really fast. And it wasn't excessive. It wasn't splatter gore. It wasn't bright red. It was just really well done. And I feel like that trend kind of persists throughout the movie. All the wolf wounds are pretty tasteful, like for want of a better word.
Yeah.
It's not like spewing guts and exploding chests. It's much more like...
That woman's head falls off camera.
off camera. We just get a thump sound. It's used for, comedic effect rather than over the top gore. And I think that was a pretty great choice, especially for a werewolf movie where we expect throats being ripped out.
Yeah.
There's a great shot, I can't remember who gets munched, but there's a great shot where you get POV and it flies in on just like a normal clean human neck and it pulls out just as quick and the neck's gone and it's like a second.
Oh, that's like the vagrant guy, isn't it, in the Bronx?
It is, yeah. But you don't see a bite, you don't really hear a bite. It's just like in, gone, out. And that kind of level of like speed and viciousness is what made me fear whatever was committing these attacks early on in the movie. And it's later on what you kind of love about the wolves, I think, the Wolfen later on in the movie.
I have a question for you that's a bit tangential.
Go on.
In the bar scene, when Dewey's all sort of roughed up and he goes in to see the Native Americans that are hanging out in the bar, there's a Tom Waits song on.
Yes.
Why do you think they picked Jitterbug Boy, that specific Tom Waits song?
I couldn't tell what Tom Waits song it was at the time, and I knew that if I focused on it too much, I was going to get totally sucked out of the scene and I would regret it and I'd have to go back and watch it again. So I'm glad you said that song. It could be... I don't put that song in this movie for $1 million. Like, it,
No.
I don't think it. I don't put Tom Waits in this movie. Maybe as an actor, that would be interesting. But
well, so that
as
he
a
was
soundtrack-
originally in that scene. He was originally in the bar playing piano.
No way.
And they cut it, yeah.
Interesting.
Which is weird because why would he be playing in a Native American bar?
And why would you cut it? Would be my big question.
That's the bit that's actually insane.
I don't know why that song. I can't even speculate. It's a totally bizarre choice. My take on it would be not to be too insider baseball, but Tom Waits is obviously famously protective of his catalog. Won't touch anything advertising. Won't touch anything that promotes a product, and has pretty much, to my knowledge, final say in how all of his music's used in movies. So it may be that was his whimsical choice.
Yeah, maybe. For the audience, for the people listening, if you don't know Tom Waits, that song is about like a guy lying about his life. Maybe
Tall tales.
Yeah, because I guess they're like fucking with him in that scene, but they're not lying to him. I don't know. It's just weird.
Yeah. I mean, if they were going so deep as to try and tie a Tom Waits, or maybe the song might have inspired the scene, there could be some kind of story going on there. I would have thought that Tom Waits would have to have some say in what song gets used in a movie, because especially a movie that he ostensibly performed in. Just because, having read like every book ever written about Tom Waits, I can't see that being a thing that he would just be like, yeah, use whatever. Yeah, unless they were really good buds.
Yeah. Well, normally you'd approach an artist and say, I wanted to use this song in this scene, and like sometimes, or more recently, it's because of the juxtaposition of the music to what's happening on screen. But generally, it's meant to underline or underpin some sort of subtext or some sort of element that's happening within the scene. And like all the choices that are made in the direction of this film are very, very deliberate. So it feels like there should be some reason that we're getting Jitterbug Boy. Yeah, I
think you're right to get
out.
hooked on it though, because I made a mental note, cool Tom Waits song playing in that scene, but I did the whole time think slightly grindy. Like if it's a choice because of lyrical content, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a really lyric-driven piano vocal song playing during such a dialogue-heavy scene with so much important exposition, because your brain is being split in half. Mine was anyway. However, that might be just another challenging aspect of the movie, that it wants you to feel chattered at. It wants you to feel like you've got to keep an eye on two narratives running at the exact same time, and you've got to be aware of lots of. Tom Waits' voice is obviously all about texture. It's pure gravel, but it's subtle melody in amongst chaos a lot of the time. So maybe that's some kind of. This guy loved Woodstock. This guy was obviously a hippie, had a lot of time for iconoclastic artists and music that challenges the mainstream. And maybe he was just kind of pulling a dick move and giving us too much to think about all at once. I don't know, but I loved it. I thought, there's no way on earth these guys would be listening to Tom Waits, but I love what they're doing here.
Like, it's basically the only song in the movie as well. Like, there's some score, and then that's the only bit of, like... I can't think of any
other music, yeah. Oh, there's a scene where Dewey is listening to some music in his office, but it's not like a jam that jumps out at you. It's something fairly ambient. It's like some like low-key string stuff. That's the only other song I can think of in the whole movie. Interesting. We'll have to reach out to Tom Waits' people. Tom, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on the show.
Yeah, Tom, there's no if about it. We know that you're
Tom.
listening. You've read every book about Sam Russo.
Such a great career and storied life, the man, Tom Waits.
Yeah.
We'd like to see him in more movies, please.
Will you give it up, man? Nobody's out there. We're alone. Oh no, there's somebody out there. I'm picking up all this crosstalk.
So, Wolfen, do you have any final thoughts on the movie?
Well, I had a couple of other lines that I really liked that I just wanted to flag because I thought they were really good. So there's the scene when he's trying to get into, is it the morgue or whatever, and the guy's like, "I need your ID," and he's like, "My face is white. The only difference between you and a dog is that you have a brain."
No, the only difference between you and a guard dog is a brain.
And he says, "Good boy," or whatever when he walks.
It's great. There's a fantastic moment. I think it's when they're doing the stakeout with the guns, which I thought was weird. Whittington kind of gets pulled out of the morgue and taken out to be like a sharpshooter in a like sting operation, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, that's pretty odd.
I loved it.
But
he's drinking and he pulls a moonie and he says, what did he say, like full black moon over the Bronx? He's shaking his ass out the window. It's great. He's got some great lines. The best comedy in the movie for sure. But I honestly, I was so in it that I didn't write down any dialogue. Normally I'm like feverishly tapping out all the bits of dialogue that I really like. But this was like whip crack throughout, and I loved the dialogue from start to finish.
Yeah. I think my favourite line in the entire movie, which makes you think that Dewey's going to die at some point in the film, is that first scene in the morgue when he's with Whittington, and he's like, "Hey, your hair's getting a bit long. Do you want to lie down and I'll cut it for you?" And he's like, "Not till it's my turn."
Pretty great.
And you think, well, A, that's just amazing noir dialogue. But B, that means you're going to die at some point in this movie. So you're waiting for him to die, and he doesn't, which is great.
I love that you can't tell if he's joking. Like, does he normally lay down in the morgue and have his hair cut by a mortician? Because he delivers it so deadpan. You're like, maybe that's the thing they do. I don't know. Very cool. Keeps you on edge. A lot of the dialogue is so dry that you just you don't know if you're coming or going. And I love that. I love when you feel like an outsider in dialogue because it feels so real. It feels like this is just people that you don't know talking, rather than constantly clamoring to make you feel included and make you feel like one of the cool guys. I love feeling like I'm slightly pushed out by this group of super tight characters who are just living their lives and we happen to be watching. I think that's one of the movie's strengths. That I bet this script doesn't get as much love as it should in terms of both the dialogue and the delivery. It feels really well worked. It feels drafted. It feels honed. By the time that we finish watching Wolfen, I am just about ready to slot it back on the shelf with movies that I would definitely watch again. I'm assuming you've watched it many times?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. It's got serious rewatch value for me, I think.
It's almost like, do you know there's like those movies where you feel like you're hanging out with your old friends? Mm-hmm. I think there's a bunch of movies like that for me, and like most of them are like what Netflix would categorize as like late night comedies or whatever. Sure. Like the Kids in the Hall movie, or I Love You Man, or Tommy Boy.
For me it's like any John Hughes movie, that kind of thing, or like Fast Times. Those are kind of the comfort viewing I feel included movies that I go to. Yeah,
but like because of the dialogue in this and the way that the characters back and forth, it fits really easily into like those. Oh, let's just go hang out with Dewey and Whittington for a few hours. Like,
sure. How bizarre for this to feel like a buddy cop movie and be so far from a buddy cop movie. I absolutely agree. I love that about it. And one of the things that struck me in kind of where I was placing this movie in my mind at the end of it, the reason I go back and watch Seven again is not the plot. It's a fantastic movie, but it's more like the details. It's more, I want to rewatch that scene and look for that detail in the performance, or I want to follow the clues again, that kind of thing. Because it's not a mystery really, but it's a great cops following clues movie. And I always go back to good versions of that trope, because when it's done well, it's not something that you can just experience singularly. I think it's something that you can revisit and learn more, each time you watch it, you can gather more information, having known how the plot resolves. So I put it as like a really satisfying rewatch. It would be a 7-day rental for me, and I'd probably watch it 2 or 3 times. Watch it once alone, scare the shit out of myself, watch it once with a couple of buddies, and then maybe just watch it again in the background. It's that kind of movie.
Well, I think 7's quite a good shout in there as well, because there's quite a lot of that sort of awkward but quirky dialogue between Riggs and Murtaugh, whatever they're called in 7.
Riggs and Murtaugh. Yeah, absolutely. Can't remember their names either. Great characters. I can't remember at all. It's Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt. That's all we need to know. But again, the dimensions that we're given of those characters, kind of shallow. That we know that Morgan Freeman is at the end of his rope. We get some great moments in that movie where he shows anger, and that feels like a big step up for his character. Yeah. Brad Pitt is like a feisty, ambitious young cop. These characters feel more real. Yeah. You know, to me, these are the kind of performances that I can really, really get behind and you know, wholeheartedly say I'm a fan of. That's
the difference here, is that, I mean, Brad Pitt isn't a bad actor, but he's a film star. He's a film star first and an actor second.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way around.
Whereas everybody in this movie, like I said earlier, is an actor.
Yeah.
You could put if you had like some sort of acting competition, I don't know how you would score that.
I love this idea.
But like, I think we're in echelons here. I think these are some of the best actors giving some of their best performances.
I haven't seen Albert Finney do anything I like more than this, I don't think. I'd have to revisit the catalogue a bit, but my one thing I did make a note of that I thought was, I don't know if it was just me picking up on it, but James Tolkien's scene as Baldy, where he's doing the fibre analysis. Is he doing the fibre analysis? Yeah, that's the irony. He's bald, he's analysing hair. Very funny again, like great comedy chops. He's on screen for like 20 seconds, but he acts like he's showed up on set 10 minutes before. Someone's put a lab coat on him, told him what his role is. He's gone in and absolutely nailed it to the wall. He's just like chewing gum, marching around, delivering his lines perfectly with total authority. And then it feels like as soon as the camera pans away, he takes that coat off and goes and does another job. Yeah. Like he walks straight onto another set and just starts delivering lines. It feels like workhorse acting. Exactly like you said, it's craftsmanship, it's imperfect and it's beautiful and it's really hard-working actors. I think the whole movie is kind of held together by that graft. Like it really feels like people are grafting. Everyone's taking it really seriously. Nobody's like, I'm in a shitty, gory horror movie, B movie that might get me some more work if I'm lucky. I think everyone's taking the brief really seriously, and maybe that's directorial, maybe it's the time, it could be a million things, but for whatever reason, this cast is pulled together really well, and they deliver not career-defining performances necessarily, but incredibly strong performances for a movie that, you know, probably was never really going to go anywhere, you know? Yeah.
We're coming off the back of the 70s here, and that was a decade where proper auteurs were making horror films with big-name actors, and they were doing really well. You've got films like The Exorcist and Don't Look Now and The Changeling and Rosemary's Baby and all these sort of big-name horror films, like the absolute classic horror film canon now outside of the franchise names. Sure. They all sort of came in the 70s, sort of ramping up towards the end of the 70s. So it's no surprise that like you've got this level of actors interested in doing and taking seriously a role like this or a film like this, because it's been the norm for so long. In the 60s, horror films were Vincent Price looking into the camera and saying, "Ooh, there's a skeleton," or whatever. Like, do you know what I mean?
Price. Yeah, like, for sure. Hammy, predictable, yeah.
And like even the earnest horror films in the 60s were still very goofy because they were made for a very young audience. Whereas like,
sure,
as we moved into the 70s and into the 80s, into the early 80s, before all the franchises hit from like 1985.
Yeah.
All the franchises became franchises in 1985. You've just got this real, like, these are films for adults.
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of it. And like a kid could watch it and be like, "Oh, there's a gore," and then I went to sleep for an hour, and then there was wolves.
That's a great Kid read of this movie. That should have been the whole podcast.
But that hour is the meat. That hour is the best bit.
It is, yeah, for sure. You don't get the ending without the middle, for sure. Yeah. The middle is where the graft goes in this movie. Oh, I totally agree. Like, you have to take into account that context to understand why these people are trying so hard in this movie. And I love that about it. It really feels like a genuine piece of filmmaking. It doesn't feel like a cash in. It doesn't feel like a quick studio pick knocked out. It doesn't feel like we need to meet our quota of Wolf movies because they'd way overdone it that year, as you said at the top, in terms of Wolf movies. And it just feels like it's right place, right time for this cast. You know, a little moment in movie history. And everyone brings their A game. Nobody hogs the spotlight. Nobody goes over the top. Everyone's in check, in line, and fucking doing their thing. And yeah, I love that about this movie. It's a real ensemble, but not in the like over the top dramatic way that we view ensembles nowadays. Cracking stuff. What should I watch with Albert Finney in it if I loved this movie? If I'm a listener who really enjoyed this but doesn't really know where to go in the Finney oeuvre, where you want to point me?
Oh, that's a great question. Tom Jones is the character that he is known for.
Mm-hmm.
When I wrote his obituary for Salford Online, it was Salford star of Tom Jones dies at whatever age he was when he died.
No way, you wrote his obituary?
Only for the Salford-based web publication that I was working for at the time.
That's great.
Yeah, big thanks to Albert Finney for dying while I worked there.
Made your career. A big byline for Jamie C.
But yeah, that one, The Duelists in the 70s, big fan of that. I rate his Poirot. He was a good Poirot.
Me too.
And obviously Scrooge. That musical take on Scrooge, amazing. I love it.
Scrooge is wild. I find it really hard to love a Scrooge more than Michael Caine in Muppets, Muppet Christmas Carol. But in terms of like serious Scrooges, Finney for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so imagine there's a 1981 wolf Mexican standoff.
Right.
Who's coming out on top?
Of all the wolves.
Of the 1981 wolves.
This is my fave.
Nice.
To be completely honest, I was never a huge American Werewolf in London fan. It just didn't do a lot
Podcast
for
over.
Me. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to rewatching it with you in mind. I find that when I rewatch these horror movies that I didn't love when I first saw them, but I think about you, I just enjoy them like 10 times more. But this does way more for me. I love werewolves in classic horror. I love Lon Chaney. I love Curse of the Werewolf. I love a lot of classic werewolf depictions because I know what I'm getting. It's comfort viewing. American Werewolf in London, yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. But I would almost go as far as say I love this movie. It takes it to a place that resonates a lot more with me as a fan of movies, not just of horror movies. On my shelf to my left here, I've got 8 to 14, well, like two shelves worth of books on Native American culture. One of them is just about wolves in Native American culture. So that's something that I read a lot about as a fan. And
you should have maybe
dipped
into it to do some research for this.
Some quotes, yeah, maybe I should have. I should dig into Osceola, yeah. But loads of great stuff that I've read, in my short life on that kind of stuff. But also as a fan of this type of cop movie and this type of just pulling all these elements together and crushing them into this pretty weirdly psychological claustrophobic mystery type movie, just ticks borderline every single box I've got that you could imagine within this sphere. So I would say it's one of my favorite, if we're going to call it a werewolf movie, it's one of my favorite werewolf movies. I'd say definitely in the Battle of the Wolves of this year of 1981, this comes out on top for me, and it's a movie that I will definitely return to and really enjoy, and will show other people definitely. Nice. What about you? Where are you placing it in the wolf pack?
I mean, it's a tricky question, isn't it? And that's why I asked you and not gave my own opinion. So,
but it's opinion based. It's what you like, isn't it?
I mean, I love all three of these movies.
Mm-hmm.
There is something about Wolfen that feels very different to The Howling and American Werewolf in London. And I think American Werewolf in London and The Howling to a lesser extent feel young and vibrant. They feel like they're made by like the sort of filmmaker that we now come to expect, like that sort of hungry, super knowledgeable and super reverent filmmaker, like your Joe Dantes, your Spielbergs, but your people like Joe Dante, who made The Howling, and John Landis. I don't know, they feel like they're much quirkier in the way that they're making films, and they're making films that feel a lot more like, hey, we're cool and we're young.
Check out our effects, look at our costumes,
For the people listening, I did like to highlight cool and young, I did the Steve Martin wild and crazy guys hand gesture.
Yeah, you did. Wild and crazy guys.
Cool and young, like Steve Martin.
Like Steve Martin and Martin Short. You're right, that's what those movies feel, look and sound like to me. They're more showy. And
like, again, I can't articulate it any better, but Wolfen feels like a proper movie, like a real film.
Yeah.
You don't feel like anyone's having fun. People are there to work.
Yeah.
And they're there to get the job done. And that's what you were talking about before in that graft. Whereas like, you feel like, hey, we're having a fun time on set and we just happen to get a movie out of it. And granted, it's one of the best werewolf movies ever made, but it's not Wolfen, is it?
Okay, look at it this way. I think we can trim the fat off this question. If there was a movie triple feature in your town tonight, and all three of these 81 movies were happening at the same time, you can only get a ticket and go see one. Which one are you going to?
I'm going to the person who's organised its office and trying to understand why he's done this.
Just to fuck with you. It's me. You open the office door and it's me. Hello, Jamie.
So, I watched Wolfen like last week, so I'm not going to watch Wolfen.
Pretend the podcast doesn't exist.
I mean, that's a tricky one because I would probably go and watch American Werewolf in London because watching that with a crowd, it would be a very different experience to watching this with a crowd. The
cinematic experience, yeah. I'd go to this because there'd be no one in there. It'd just be me, which is how I like it.
That's why you scheduled them at the same time, wasn't it?
Exactly. It's a private screening, dude. I don't even need to think about it. This, a large salted popcorn, I'm away. Leave me alone.
You go salted?
Oh, every time. Every time.
I'm a mixed guy myself.
Mixed? Ooh. I mean, that's a very specific kind of heresy, but I like it.
And, if I'm feeling particularly nihilistic that day, I might get the full Odeon nachos.
Oof,
which is
wild.
Absolute horrible decadence. Like, there's so much at play there. You hate everybody else in the cinema. You want them to suffer.
You hate yourself more than anything.
Absolutely. You don't care.
You hate Mexico. You hate nachos.
Yeah. You hate the clothes that you're wearing.
Yeah, you do. You also want to buy into the dumbest, most ridiculous idea that cinema's ever had, and that's to tell everyone to be really quiet and then give them nachos. What the fucking loudest food on earth? You might as well bring out a fajita platter while you're at it. Like, it's ridiculous.
And you also hate money because you're spending
14 quid on crisps.
Yeah. All right, so any final Wolfen thoughts from you, Mr. Russo?
Just thank you for putting this movie in front of me, and I'm really glad.
Does it make up for Cannibal Holocaust?
I'm not glad it's not Cannibal Holocaust, because I have a very special place in the deepest, darkest recess of my soul where I secretly quite enjoy Cannibal Holocaust. But I love Wolfen because it's exactly what you said not to say earlier. It's kind of a real movie. Like it's a fully accomplished piece of filmmaking with fantastic performances in it and a really interesting plot to me. I really find the plot interesting. I would be tempted to read the Whitley Strieber book off the back of seeing this movie. I read Communion.
Good.
You read it?
Yeah.
Oh, good. If it gets your vote of confidence, I'll try it because I thought Communion was borderline unreadable.
This might be his first novel.
Right.
And he's really hungry and the writing's good. The characters are pretty different. Mm-hmm. So I think you could read it and not feel like that you're just watching or you're just reading the same thing that you just watched.
Well, I mean, the movie made me want to read the book, and the book happens to be written by a guy whose writing I don't love. So that speaks to the strength of the movie, I think. But it really lit my imagination up. That was what really got me with this movie. It had me guessing at times, even though, how many movies have you guessing when they're called Wolf? They have a picture of a wolf on the front and a full moon, and the opening scene's a wolf attacking a man. It still had me thinking and kept me on my toes. So it does so much so well that it's kind of hard to summarize. But what I would say is that, in what was becoming at the time and still is now a pretty tired genre, the werewolf genre, I think it does something really brave and really new, and it does it really well. So I would give this, 5 huge glinting claws in the moonlight out of 5. I thought it was a fantastic watch, and I'm grateful to have watched it. Thanks for putting it in front of me.
I wonder if, it's a sort of blessing and a curse that this film came out in 1981 because people assumed it was a werewolf movie and maybe didn't give it the attention that it deserves. Mm-hmm. When, if they'd have watched it after having watched American Werewolf and The Howling, they'd have been like, oh shit, this is actually giving me something different and nourishing and interesting, where they weren't necessarily getting that or getting something different from those other 2 movies.
Well, nowadays they probably would have Dusk Till Dawned it, wouldn't they? They probably would have put it out as a cop movie, and then people watching the cop movie would have found out it's a werewolf movie. I don't know.
Has anyone ever Dusk Till Dawned a movie that isn't Dusk Till Dawn?
Huge question. I don't think you really can post Dusk Till Dawn. I don't think you can now, given how much you have to give away about a movie just to get someone to even fucking consider watching it. But none spring to mind. I think of slightly ambiguous horror titles where you don't really know what's going to happen, but you're kind of sold on the idea, like District 9 maybe, or Super 8, where the antagonist is semi-ambiguous, but it's going to be a horror movie. I don't know. I can't think of any that spring to mind. No, it's pretty fucking unique in that respect.
This film is perfect for werewolf fatigue. Because you're...
Werewolf fatigue. I'd almost let that phrase pass me by. Werewolf fatigue. Bring it on.
Well, just because it's you're given all these sort of werewolfy tropes interspersed with good acting and real drama and witty repartee, as I've said, and then you get to that moment when it's oh shit, here's the big change scene, and it's just a guy hobbling about on all fours in the nude.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just you just go to a completely different place after that, and it's just amazing.
It's so true. Yeah, you're 100% right. And that's what captures my imagination. It's not just the idea of wolves in New York. It's this idea of a Native American spirituality type subplot mixed in with an environmental perspective, mixed in with a bit of a take on class and wealth corrupting everything. It does so much with so little. And that I'm always going to respect and love in a movie. But it does so in a way that made me walk away and think a lot more about the themes, and made me kind of explore the visuals with a little bit more sort of cinematic seriousness than a lot of werewolf movies maybe do, because they're satisfying. I love mist and fog. I'm leaving a werewolf movie satisfied with how much fog I've seen. I'm leaving this movie, eminently more satisfied with so many other things. And that's what makes it a bit of a surprise smash hit for me.
Like you say with the Native American plot, there's a line in a documentary on Shudder, might have been Cursed Pictures, whatever that documentary series was called, and they're talking about the trope of it's built on an Indian burial ground, and the guy's like, if we're honest with ourselves, it's all Indian burial ground.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, it just makes you think of that, and how you don't think of New York as a place where there were Native American tribes, but they were everywhere. They were the indigenous people, and they were decimated by, me and you, the British.
But yeah, coast to coast, and that again, that's what you lose sight of if you limit your perception of America to these cityscapes and these kind of images of these places that we're fed as the modern versions of them. It's a pretty simplistic way to view a fucking enormous landmass, to just perceive New York as New York now, but also to not do flashbacks. I think it was really brave and really cool in this movie to not just default to that as a device and just be like, oh, here we are in the past. I thought that was really cool, and not to have some crusty old, some old timer doing some exposition, like to keep it fresh and new and avoid those traps and just keep telling us the same story in new ways, I think was a very, very cool thing to do. Yeah, geographically exciting, historically relevant. It's finger on the pulse in terms of themes.
Yeah.
Kind of timeless. The performances make it pretty timeless. Great costume. We didn't talk about the costume. Some really clever, understated costume choices. Beautiful set pieces. A bit of a podcast smash hit. This one. Won't just go on the horror shelf. This will go on the great movie shelf, I think, for me.
Well, I'm glad that you liked it. Did you like it? Is that what's?
Is that what you're picking up on? Yeah, I liked it.
It's just great. I would give it. I'm in the 9s. Oof. Somewhere in the 9s.
Nice. The 9 points.
Yeah.
I mean, in the 9s is pretty huge. Especially again, not compared. Am I Irish? Not compared to any of the movies that we've reviewed so far, but there haven't been many 9s.
No, and also my numeral system is nonsense. It's just whatever number.
Yeah, it's not 9 today. 9 out of what? It could be 9 out of 1,000.
Yeah, but it's just a really fucking good film.
My advice would be check out Wolfen, and thanks Wolfen for being Wolfen.
Yeah, thank you, Michael Wadley, for making this, then fucking off, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, dude. Blaze a trail.
Sorry about the environment.
Yeah, sorry you were right all along, and nobody listened then, and nobody's listening now. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Final Transmission. I've been Sam Russo.
Signing off. Forever. As we melt into the toxic waste.
Yes. Drowning in the toxic waste. As always, Sam and Jamie, thanks for coming.